Welcome everyone to the Fermentation Association's webinar of Retail Sales Trends for Fermented Sauces. I'm Amelia Nielsen-Stoll, editor of TFA. We are a trade group that was launched to support producers who use fermentation to create delicious and often healthful food and beverages. Our goals are to help educate consumers about fermentation and its benefits, support scientific research into those health benefits, and work with food safety authorities to establish clearer and more appropriate regulations in regards to fermentation. Today, we bring you two great speakers, Kevin Snodgrass, Solutions Architect for Spins, and Jared Schwartz, founder of the fermented sauce company, Poor Devil Pepper, and Director of Operations and Quality for Farm Ferments, a fermentation facility in Hudson, New York, that is also home to Hawthorne Valley Farms Fermentation Wing. We have many questions already submitted and reviewed with our speakers. If there are additional topics you'd like to see addressed, please enter them in the chat below and we will try to get to them. I will come back at the end to answer questions or to ask questions. For now, I will turn it over to you, Jared and Kevin.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm excited to be here with Kevin. Kevin is a solutions architect for Spins, as Amelia noted. In his role there, he aligns brands with retail measurement solutions that help inform their business decisions. We, as a brand manufacturer in the market, I could say we 100% use Spins to monitor and kind of see growth on channels and against other brands and in regions, and it's a invaluable tool to use. He also works with top food and beverage brands to help them manage their performance with current store partners, unpack the competition in their category, and maximize the market impact, as well as working with emerging brands to leverage this data. Stoked to be here with you, Kevin. Let you take it away.
Excellent. Yeah, stoked to be with you as well, Jared, and with Amelia and the rest of TFA and the folks on the phone. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen going here, so give me 1 second. Okay, excellent. Well, hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As both Amelia and Jared mentioned there, it's great to be here with you. I've worked pretty closely here over the last couple of weeks with the folks at the Fermentation Association, really to create a custom categorization of fermented sauces. And so, for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll share some high-level insights on the state of this category in the U.S. market as tracked by Spins Retail Measurement Services. So, I want to stop for a second just to really focus on the idea that, we'll be looking at shelf-stable products. It will be for the U.S. market and U.S. retailers as tracked by Spins, which I think, as you'll see, and I think a lot of people on the phone know, we have great coverage within the market. So I know there were some questions around that that came in, but wanted to make that clear. So my hope is that you leave today's session with a better sense for the health of these products, in fermented sauces, their development in the market, and of course the brands that are driving growth. Of course, I expect that there'll be questions on the content that's presented. So please know, as mentioned, that we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. That's both questions you submitted prior, as well as questions that you submit today via the chat. Additionally, I want to, make it clear that I'll be working with the folks, with Jared and with the folks at the Fermentation Association to ensure that any questions that aren't addressed today, we certainly do so at a later date. Now, before we really dive in, I'd like to take a few minutes to obviously introduce Spins, our mission, our services, and what differentiates us in the marketplace. I think that's important just from an education standpoint to understand how we're really getting to some of these insights. So really, for more than 20 years, the mission of Spins has been to increase the presence and accessibility of products that lead to a more vibrant America. In that time, we've partnered with over 100 leaders in innovative retail and have been the source of wellness insights for more than 1,000 brands. And so together with these brands and retailers, we've watched as the natural products industry has experienced explosive growth to the point where it's nearly doubled in the past decade alone. And so we see in working with these brands and retailers that are driving sustainable growth, that they're using data, point of sale data, to support executional excellence. And that retail point of sale data is the core of what we do here at Spins. We collect the data from over 100 storefronts across the US, and that number continues to grow. And we enhance it with our in-depth health and wellness attributes in an effort to deliver actionable insights through best-in-class applications to help our clients grow. And so there are really two key practices that differentiate Spins in the market from, say, another syndicated data provider. The first here is that we're the only provider that can give brands an end-to-end line of sight on their distribution. And so what that means is that they're able to see performance of their products in not only innovative natural retailers like Sprouts, but also in fast-growing regional retailers, regional chains, and even mainstream conventional grocery like Kroger, Target, and Walmart. So again, key differentiator there, it's kind of end-to-end line of insight. And that's something that we're going to be using today when we really look at the dynamics, within this category. The second differentiator, and perhaps the most critical, is our health and wellness attributes. So we analyze label claims, certifications, nutrition facts, ingredients, and allergens in order to enable a complete product understanding. And so when you combine this depth of attribution and insight with our cross-channel retail partnerships that we just talked about, this capability really offers a forward-looking view of the market that, really no other provider in the space can deliver. And so with that, it kind of leads us to today's discussion. So Spin's product attribution is what enabled me and the folks at at TFA to develop an impactful categorization of kind of quote unquote fermented sauces so that we could deliver some of these valuable insights to all of you. More specifically, we used our Spin's product type attribute to isolate the categories and subcategories that are the core of this segment. And so what you can see here is that for this analysis, we use the shelf-stable condiments, dressings, and marinades category. So again, focus on shelf-stable in this particular component. And then we filtered deeper to all products classified with a product type of fish sauce or gochujang, natto, shoyu, soy sauce alternatives, and then tamari. And so again, kind of looking at some of the questions that have come in, I understand that there may be some questions about including natto. And so what I want to say to that is that, we worked closely, or I work closely with our product intelligence team. That's the team that really codes all of the products to ensure that we were getting as collective a definition as possible. And so that's why we went ahead and left that one in there. I also understand, of course, that some of you are interested in learning more about the refrigerated side of this segment. Certainly that's Jared's go-to and his forte. And so we will touch on that a little bit later, even though it's not necessarily contained in this analysis. So let's go ahead and dive in here. First and foremost, looking at kind of macro high-level trends. There are three main channels that Spins defines and that we'll reference as a part of today's discussion. You've got the natural enhanced channel, the conventional multi-outlet channel, often referred to as MULO, M-U-L-O, and the convenience channel. A channel is simply an aggregate of retailers. For example, all retailers that Spins defines as natural based on their product assortment. So again, this would be Sprouts or the Fresh Time or the Fresh Market are contained within the natural enhanced channel. Likewise, all conventional food, drug, and mass retailers like the Krogers, the Walmarts, Targets of the world are contained within that conventional multi-outlet or MULO channel. And then obviously, convenience retailers being the Circle K's and the Wawas of the world. And those are all within that channel. So in the chart below, what you see is a 3-year trend of dollar sales across all channels for this fermented sauces category. The graphic also shows year-over-year growth as well as compounded growth. So across all three channels, this category of fermented sauces is $275 million, and it grew 41% versus the prior year. And this is data ending February 21st. This is what we refer to as our period 2 data. So a $275 million category in the last 52 weeks in the last year, and it's grown 41%. As you can see, a majority of the sales were done in the multi-outlet channel at nearly 250 million. And then you had the natural channel providing or contributing about 25 million, and then a small base coming in from convenience. So the acceleration in growth was led mostly by the natural and the multi-outlet channels, which had 30% growth for natural and 42% for multi-outlet. So good double-digit growth there. When comparing this growth versus the prior year to 2 years ago, we can see a jump of about 35 points. So again, going from 2 years ago to year ago, the category was up about 6%. And then of course, from year ago, to today, we're seeing it up 41%. As most of you can imagine, again, looking at this at a fairly high level, this kind of large increase was really due to a surge in buying across the board, not necessarily just in this segment, but across the board in the industry and in retail, due to the pandemic. And so that's why we see that big jump there. So interesting, I often like to step kind of slightly below that total channel level. And here we can actually look at the development of fermented sauces by regions within channels. Sometimes there's some great insight here. Sometimes it's what we might expect. But I think there's some valuable insight, certainly for any brands or those that support brands here. And in the graphics below, what you'll see is the product development index for fermented sauces by region in the natural enhanced channel on the left, and then the MULO channel on the right. And the index is created by comparing units sold per household for each region to units sold per household at the total channel level. So what's really important here is that any number above 110 means the products are well developed in that region. And any number below 90 means the products are underdeveloped in that region. And so it's likely not surprising that fermented sauces are well developed in the Western regions across both channels. But what is important to note, again, if you're a brand or someone who supports a brand, is that the natural retail shopper for this category heavily skews towards the West, as we see the indices at greater than 200, even 313 in the Northwest. And so in kind of talking about this with the TFA, one thing that we obviously consider is that we know there's a heavier concentration of natural retail options in some of these regions, but I still think this is a valuable insight, for any brand that's focusing on natural channel distribution or natural retail strategy, in that there is a very heavy focus towards the West, where it's really just not nearly developed at all, within some of the regions central or east, or even, kind of southeast when you look at it. Okay, so let's unpack then really from a product perspective. As mentioned, we use the product type attribute to help define this category. And so what you see here is the share of total category dollars by each product type and the growth of dollars versus prior year. So again, share of each product type on the left, and then the growth on those dollars versus prior year. So again, likely not too surprising, the market is led by soy sauces or shoyu, which hold almost 70% share of that total $275 million. Just as a reminder, the category grew by 41% versus prior years. So while almost all of the product types here are growing double digits, it's really fish sauce, which would be products from, say, Thai Kitchen, and gochujang, like products from Chungjeong One, that outpaced the category and led the way with 50% and 55% growth, respectively. It's also important to note that while these two types are showing the highest growth rates, excuse me, they are smaller segments as compared to soy sauce, which contributed 55 million in new dollars versus prior year, as compared to 7 million in new dollars for fish sauce and gochujang combined. So like to look at growth rates and understand it relative to the size, and that's what we see kind of on the far right. But just a reminder again, when we talk about those that are really contributing, I mean, soy sauce still bringing in 55 million in new dollars, which is pretty well represented at about 42% growth. But as you can imagine, that's carries a lot of weight. So then we know how these product types are performing. We look at the 3-year trends. And so the question becomes, who are the brands, or I should say the top brands within the category? And here again, it's especially important to always separate the natural channel and the multi-outlet channel, just because product assortments in these types of stores really will vary. It's also helpful to see in that here at Spins, we often see a correlation between brands having early success in incubation in the natural enhanced channel, and then kind of jumping over the fence and continuing that success in the MULO channel. So in the table on the left, we see the top 10 brands in the natural channel sorted in descending order by total dollars in the last 52 weeks. We also see their year-over-year growth rate there on the right-hand side. And then similarly to the far right, we have a table there where we see the top 10 brands in the MULO channel. And so sometimes, there's fragmentation, but I think what you can see here is, Kikkoman, Sanjay, Bragg, they're all showing really strong double-digit growth in both channels. Something that we also see is emerging brands like Mother-in-Law's Kimchi, which right out of the gate, you might question, why is kimchi in for sauces? But this is actually their newer gochujang products. And so, we're really seeing them gain traction within the natural channel. And so kind of to my earlier point about the fragmentation, 6 of the top 10 brands in the natural channel here are also among the top 10 brands in the MULO channel, which suggests that this category is actually not very fragmented. A lot of the players that have success, even in a natural retailer, are also seeing some great success within the conventional multi-outlet channel. What this could also mean, certainly if you're a brand looking at these particular brands, is some of those that are unique over on the left-hand side in natural enhance, there's a high likelihood that we could see these folks, again, kind of jump over and start to gain traction in MULO. So, brands to keep an eye on, especially those two at the bottom there with Osawa and Yamasa. And so if we take just kind of a slightly different look, the last slide was helping us see, just in terms of overall dollars, who are some of the key players, the top 10 brands. But now we want to look at who are really the fastest growing brands within each channel. And so the graphic below shows total dollar sales on the vertical axis, and then dollar percent change or percent growth on the horizontal axis. The brands in the graphic are the top 7 brands in terms of absolute new dollars contributed to the category in the natural channel. And what I really want to stress and note here is that this is a separate look just for the natural channel only. So kind of, again, separating the dynamics for us. It doesn't contain any MULO channel data. And so, you've got the dollars on the left, you've got your percent change on the bottom. Again, these brands were selected because they were the top brands in terms of overall new dollars brought into this fermented sauces category. And so ideally for any brand, you want to fall as high and as far to the right as possible within this bubble chart, because it means that you not only hold a large share of the category, dollar share, but also obviously that you're growing very well. And so what we see in line with what was mentioned on the last slide is that you've got, say, Mother-in-Law's Kimchi with their gochujang products as one of the fastest growing brands in the channel at nearly 101%. So 101% growth. And then you can, of course, see that big bubble there in the top center. Sanjay maintains, not only the highest share, but again, along the lines of the category, they're growing fairly well at 38.1%. So top contributors in the natural channel. And then if we go ahead and flip, very similar chart, but now we're going to actually look at the dynamics within the conventional multi-outlet channel. And so here, I think what's key is we see more so that the largest brands also by far are the greatest contributors to growth in terms of absolute new dollars. So you'll actually see off to the right-hand side, and want to note that Kikkoman, I pulled them out of the graph in order to maintain scale, because their dollars come in at about 160 million, and really that far out, exceeds some of the other brands that we have within the graphic. So all brands are experiencing double-digit growth. That's a great sign, as we know with the category. Again, Chungjang 1, representing the gochujang segment, is actually growing 103%. So, items to keep an eye on. We know from the earlier product type slide that fish sauce products are also experiencing great growth. And so that's really where we see Thai Kitchen come into play here. A brand that has decent share within the category in the conventional multi-outlet channel, and again is outpacing category growth at about 56.2%. And so, as we discussed, use the product type attribute to really define the category. But I think what's most important here is then to kind of sink our teeth into, some of the other attributes that Spins has available. We code for over 250. 30% of those typically relevant for any category. And so we want to just kind of look at this category and understand what are those other attributes, those label-based claims maybe, that we're seeing really driving growth. And so here we use the expanded attribution specifically to look at label-based claims and which ones are growing fastest. So for the category overall, labeled organic, non-GMO certified, and labeled gluten-free were the fastest growing claims with growth of roughly 35 to 40%. Each of these claims also had substantial dollar share within the category. So certainly that's important, as well as that we want to see that a majority of the products, or a good share of the products are coded to an attribute, and then understand really how those are driving growth. When we consider kind of some of the top brands that we saw on the previous slides, Sanjay was a consistent performer in both channels. And so the image below is actually their organic tamari gluten-free soy sauce. And typically what attributes will do for, say, brand or retailer or whomever is consuming the data is that they'll enlighten why certain brands and products are growing. In the case of this Sanjay item, it aligns with all three of the fastest growing label-based claims in the category. And so, from here, something that we can do, and I noticed it in the questions as well, is we could dive deeper, and isolate specific ingredients. We could look at things like sugar content or allergens, and really understand, is there a consumer preference, one way or another? I know this is something, I think that certainly Jared and some of his folks probably focus on as well. And that's one way that we could dive in. So with that, brings us kind of to the end of this landscape analysis. So I'll turn it back to Jared here, and he can guide us, in a Q&A discussion, and Amelia as well.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I would say, yeah, a lot of the questions we're looking at, I would say, fall kind of in between category lines here as refrigerated versus pasteurized products. I'm trying to pull up a couple of questions here for you. What are your thoughts on future growth? Looking at all this as a category in terms of where they've come, where the category is going. What would you say about future predictions based on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a topic that comes up pretty often, right? Because we're coming out of a year where you had some of these surges in buying and at retail with the pandemic. And so, I think a lot of brands, even retailers as well, they're all thinking to themselves, all right, are we gonna hang on to kind of this new everyday, this new baseline? And so, of course, it's important to look at it from category to category. What I'll say is we saw in that first slide, I mean, we were going at roughly 5-6% growth 2 years ago versus kind of a year ago, and now we shot up to 41%. And if I really looked, which I did at some of the, call it 4-week monthly trends, I think, and this is a category, a segment of products that is really having its baseline reset. And I think they're going to continue, brands and items here are going to continue to experience this great growth. In the months and even years ahead. That's just considering the shelf stable component. I think, Jared, you certainly know as well. I mean, when we get over to, again, this is the way Spins would define it into the refrigerated side. These are smaller segments in overall dollars, but you guys have been seeing some good growth that I think as well is kind of predicted to continue to trend in that direction. So I think both facets coming together. This is, for lack of a better way to put it, for real. The growth is for real, and I think it's something that will continue going forward. So.
Amelia, do you have any questions?
Yes, hi, thank you for that, sharing that research with us, Kevin. Okay, so we had a few questions. Let me pull some of these out for both you and Jared.
Sure.
First, okay, so we had a few. What are the reasons for this growing market demand? Why such consumer interest in fermented sauces now?
Yeah, I think it's important here too. Spins, we utilize point of sale data, so we're getting it directly from those registers. I think a really nice part too is we also work with the consumer panel, and so that's something where we'd want to layer on and look at what do purchase demographics look like for the consumers. Layer in our Spins attribution to understand that non-GMO buyer, that gluten-free buyer, someone who focuses in on allergens. Where are their preferences really lie? Where are they shopping? So I'll preface by saying that I think there's more than just point of sale data you'd have to consider here. But overall, I think it's kind of what we all know, right? Is that more folks are at home. I believe they're cooking in the home as opposed to necessarily being out. And that's why we saw kind of the surge across the industry. And I think that's why we continue to see health within this particular category. I mean, when you look at these items, the items that we're talking about and their usage occasion, I think it kind of speaks to the fact that, again, this is folks in the home more so eating, preparing meals. And again, I think it's something that's gonna stick for a bit.
Yes, having tracked the fermentation industry for the past 4 years, I'll share my insights.
Sure.
Fermented sauces, I think they hit multiple trends we're seeing in the food industry right now. As Kevin mentioned, healthy food has just had a major boost in the pandemic, and it's not slowing down. People have made these healthy changes to their diet during the pandemic, and it's showing that these are going to be lifestyle habits. They're not changing it. They're not going to revert back. Also, we're seeing more Americans cooking at home. Reports are showing that's also not going to slow down. People aren't going to rush to restaurants anytime soon as we see the pandemic slowly coming to the end. And they're cooking with these fermented sauces. I think we're also seeing more Americans are gravitating towards the unique flavor profile in fermented sauces. And we're really seeing a globalization of the American kitchen. Ketchup was usually the staple of an American's dining room table. You'd have ketchup at every meal. And now I think we're seeing a lot more Americans are bringing in a variety of sauces, especially some of these Asian sauces you pulled out, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can see Jared maybe even queuing up there. I mean, on his side, when you think about raw, and I just think of your packaging, Jared, and probiotic. I mean, it's this functional nature of food. If anyone receives, some of our kind of annual insights, one of the biggest, I think, topics for this year is all about food as medicine. And I think that's, everything to what you just said, Amelia, and then what Jared and, folks are doing to think about just the health of the consumer, is critical. Yeah.
I think it definitely coattails a lot on the acceptance and growth of the fermentation market as a whole, and consumers becoming more keen and open to reaching for fermented foods. The next step is adding a flavorful fermented hot sauce in a new category. It's fresh, it's not shelf stable. They are, rich in probiotics naturally from the fermentation, the same way any fermented foods, or the majority of fermented foods that are raw and unpasteurized are. So it's a real growing channel. I'd say continues for sure.
We had a question come in. Do you think consumers are aware these sauces are fermented. A lot of these bottles don't have, the label fermented on it.
Yeah, I can kind of put my consumer hat on, I think, for this one too. I mean, this was a segment that, yeah, I was learning as much as I was going in and doing the analysis. And what I'll say is a lot of these sauces, I didn't realize some of these things were necessarily fermented, which of course that comes along with kind of the functional benefits that we've been talking about. So it's hard for me. I'd probably be more speculating without having some of the non kind of POS analysis. But my gut tells me that no, not necessarily, and that there's probably more that that can be done to push that forward. Think about it in terms of just the attribution, what's on your label, and the way you're positioning your brand. Yeah,
I think it yeah, it definitely has a lot to do with marketing. Of products in general, where it's, Tabasco is a fermented hot sauce that's then cooked down. If you want to look at that world, where it's like they're not marketing as a fermented hot sauce, but they're doing lacto fermentation for 3 years when they make it. Traditionally, soy sauce, miso, tamari, they're all part of the same channel, where it's like, unless you really dive into it, a lot of people just grab it and don't think about it. But it's definitely a rabbit hole to fall in when you look at what originated as a fermented product and where it lives in a grocery store.
Yeah, and I think the final to that is, since maybe I didn't make it clear in the beginning, is we see this segment doing really well, and so leverage that in the way you position your brand, you market your brand, like Jared just said, because it's a great thing right now, and people are paying attention. Yeah.
Do you think putting that on the label, fermentation, is important? You mentioned how gluten-free, organic, those are really trending on labels. Do you think labeling it fermented could help? Did we lose Kevin's sound?
I think so.
Oh, nope. I think I put myself on mute. Sorry about that. No, yeah. And again, I mean, from my perspective, I look at sort of the attributes that we have, and what I would say is, yes, I think putting it on there helps to connect the dots, fermented to kind of that probiotic nature, that functional nature. And I think going back to the original question, and I think there were even questions that I saw prior, which is, how do we better educate? Well, this could be a step that we start to take. And I say this in terms of you guys who are certainly out there fighting the fight, to put that on the label, the way you position your brand, you market your brand, to continue to educate folks and tell them fermented equals all these things that you're seeing across all your other food and bev categories that you're kind of leaning towards, or have an affinity for.
Well, I'd say it's definitely a double-edged sword, where it's like you start putting fermented on shelf-stable products, like from real experience. It's like, well, this is fermented and on a shelf. Why are you refrigerated and you're fermented? It's sort of, it's back 100% to the education part of it. It's kind of an interesting topic of what you should be able to claim as a fermented product, whether you're keeping it raw or you're cooking it. That's a whole other industry question, I feel like, in terms of what's all fair in war and marketing.
Did we mention Jared's the expert? All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Jared, do consumers care whether the product has been pasteurized or not?
It depends. I guess it all depends on who your demographic is that you're going after. I would say the way we've built our brand is that's our demographic that we've been using. We use spins a lot to kind of determine where our products are moving and the type of customers, what else they're buying when they're buying fermented sauces. And we're really, going after that part of the market, I guess, where it's there hasn't been, when we started making fermented sauces, I should say, no one was just going out and selling just fermented sauces. There was always like, oh yeah, we make sauerkraut, kimchi, here's our sauce. But no one really was taking all of those and just focusing on that. So it's definitely it's a unique path that has a lot of landmines all around it.
Would it be confusing for a consumer to find unpasteurized products in the refrigerated section?
if they don't know what it is, I feel like it becomes very confusing. I think the benefit, in kind of weighing it out, it's like we are organic and kind of fresh based. So it's like kind of teetering that line of the fermented case and the fresh case, which kind of levels it out. But there is definitely a huge piece to at least the next steps of the market of why should you buy fermented refrigerated sauce versus a shelf stable sauce. And that, I think that all comes down to A, preference, B, education.
We've had quite a few questions come in about probiotics. I will preface this by referring those in the audience who had questions about probiotics to our past 2 webinars. They're free on our YouTube channel. We had one with Dr. Mary Ellen Sanders on our fermented foods probiotics. And we had another one with Dr. Bob Hudkins, who specifically talked about the definition. What is the scientific definition of a fermented food? And they both mentioned how probiotics and fermented foods are not equivalent. Anyway, very interesting discussions there. You can go into more depth with those 2 webinars. But my question for you, Jared, we've had these great discussions on here about the living probiotic aspect of various fermented products. So sauces, which are mostly shelf stable, have perhaps been exposed to heat, a lot of salt. Do you think there's more of a move in the fermented sauce industry to keep these sauces alive?
I think to what I was saying, it's I'm trying to not repeat what I had just said. I would say from the probiotic aspect, it's definitely it adds to the confusion, but it's also a selling point where there's like, why should a consumer buy this? Ultimately, I think it's flavor. It's at the end of the day, it's a benefit that through the fermentation there's a probiotic aspect. We try and send our sauces out to the lab at least twice a year to get plate counts and run just basically the CFUs that are within our sauces to in fact ensure that that's still happening. It's still, as you had said in the last webinar, they aren't always directly associated, but in our case they are.
What do you find are the best ways to reach out and educate consumers to kind of dispel the myths around fermented foods?
Myths in terms of what, I guess a question would be what myths?
I'm assuming this is a question we had sent in to us. A lot of people think, fermented foods, they're still experiencing a renaissance in the US, that maybe they're not safe, that maybe they taste weird. What are some things you do when you go out and bring your products to stores or farmers markets or at food expos? What do you tell them about fermented foods?
It's funky and vinegar free. It's got this like natural layers of complexity that you can't really achieve without fermentation. That's sort of the selling pitch to it. When I think of like the first thing comes to mind obviously is botulism in terms of like myths where it's unsafe or bacteria. I think that the biggest one probably is like, will I get sick from eating this, or if it goes bad? And I think Dave from Sonoma put it best. It's like a gladiator match of all bacteria enter, one bacteria leaves in terms of lactobacillus and lactofermentation. And that's really in that world. How do you translate that, I guess, to being it's fine, it's safe. It's a harder question, more so case by case when you're troubleshooting more than selling. I don't know that you'd want to lead with that it's it's safe. But it's definitely funky. That's the best way to sell it in our
And I think one of the best ways is to just get them to try the food, which I know is hard during a pandemic since you can't be out, taste testing at grocery stores or farmers markets, but let them taste that unique flavor.
Totally. And that's sort of, I was blocking the tasting part out, because it's one of those things where it's like, especially for our category, as soon as someone tastes it, they can taste the difference.
Yeah.
But without that aspect of a selling on your side, it's really just reliant upon sending samples upon samples upon samples, and really Instagram, like whatever you can use to spread the word without physically sampling product these days.
Yeah. Okay, so Kevin, is it worth it to develop a new product after there's so many sauces out there? Is it worth it to get into this market right now?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. Again, I mean, there's when you consider kind of size of prize or even addressable market, I mean, it's something that's well established, and I think that there's certainly innovation that can come in. That's just from the shelf stable side, and what we really did some analysis on today. I would say there's definitely opportunity for innovation, keeping track of some of the attributes that we had talked about and such. I think when I look over to sort of Jared's side and he brings up, call it hot sauce, for instance, I took a look into that. I mean, today that's, a much smaller category by comparison. And so just ripe for, I think, sorry, Jared, not to bring people into your space, but, it is a ripe opportunity, for brands. So I think shelf stable and refrigerated side, yes, there's a lot of great opportunity. It could stand to have some more innovation as you look. I mean, again, some of the established brands still holding a good chunk of the share, but we see a couple other smaller brands, emerging. So overall, yes, I would say so.
And Jared, oh, sorry, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I would say, in a new emerging category, I don't see it as much as competition as it's more people kind of going back to the educating consumers.
Yeah.
You start seeing it everywhere, you're going to start to be like, what's this all about? So it's,
yes, great thought. Okay, so Jared, I know you're a 10-year veteran of the fermentation industry. Tell me, but you started Poor Devil, you started that in 2014?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a question. What did you find was the best starting out marketing plan or selling option when you started out as a small scale fermented sauce producer?
When we first started out, I think we were just dropping cases off everywhere. It's like, check this out. We used to go to like restaurants and just leave bottles at the table when we were done, just everywhere. And really just, hustling, cold calling. I think the more you put into it, the more, the more energy you get out of it. And it's just, if you don't give up pushing it, it just sort of, it keeps rolling. I guess is the best way to say it. We never really hit like farmers market circuits hard. It was just, trying to get wholesale accounts and then staying in touch with the people that work in the stores, treating them good, hooking them up. And because they're ultimately going to be the ones selling your sauce for you, and just really educating them, tasting them, and putting product out there.
Thank you. That was great insight. We had another question about where can I sell other than farmers markets, and I think you kind of answered it right there. That you were actively bringing cases to stores and restaurants to get them to try your product.
Yeah, I don't know, from a marketing, I'm trying to think, there's nothing out there like it really when we started marketing, like, which didn't help us like research how to do anything in 2014, and then Instagram wasn't what it was today. Like that's the only, I'd say, continuous tool we've used as a brand over these past 7 years. It's just Instagram.
Yeah.
That's really for a marketing for a brand, I'd say.
Well, that's impressive. You've grown the brand a lot. All right, my last question for the both of you. What is your favorite fermented sauce?
I think I was going to let Jared go first, but
I'm curious to hear what you say, and then
I think by sheer volume, I've had a lot of Thai kitchen fish sauce in the house. So we have constant, I mean, it's in the refrigerator at all times, and we cook with that on a pretty regular basis for a lot of recipes that we're trying in our house that perhaps we didn't necessarily have before. But I will say that going forward, I'm very curious about gochujang because it's something I learned about in really doing this analysis, and I'm very curious now. So that's yeah.
Totally. I mean, I say gochujang is definitely one of my favorites, probably. I mean, it's hard to pick. It's just like once you start using them, you find at least every meal, if not using 2 different fermented condiments in it. I'd go with gochujang if I had to pick one other than my own sauces.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much to all of you for attending today's webinar. And thanks to Kevin and Jared. We will post a recording on TFA's website in the next 24 hours. We also have a number of great webinars coming up in the next few weeks, including The Many Sides of Kefir with Julie Smolansky of Lifeway Kefir, Building a Fermented Brand with Sasha Strauss, and a Yeast Primer with Richard Priest. Please go to fermentationassociation.org to check these out and register. And while you're there, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.